I am Tom Munson. I've made a return from a long time absence of doing history at High Noons. I don't think I've given one for about the last 6 or 7 months. Can you believe it? I spent all that time getting this talk ready to go. No, not really. I've actually really only worked on this about the last 3 weeks. A couple things before we get going. Again, thank you everybody for coming. We are recording these to go on our YouTube channel, so in case you had friends or family who couldn't make it today, this talk in a few weeks will be available online. And because we are recording, if you could hold off your questions until the end, jot them down, try to remember them, do the best you can. So saying that, let's see, before we get going, I don't know if I should, I'll just talk right now about how this project came to be. Grace Linden, former curator of history, gave a talk on Sioux City Eats, on restaurants, about 5 or 6 years ago. But there have been had been in the past requests to do another talk on restaurants. So here we are. In preparation for doing this, one of my volunteers, Tom, over there, put together, went through every city directory, creating an individual sheet of paper for every single restaurant that has ever existed in Sioux City history. This is the... Tom, you're a rock star. How long did that take? It had to be over a year. An individual page for every restaurant, a whole box full of them. I'm guessing we're looking at something like 1,500 or so restaurants that have existed in the course of Sioux City history. I'm sorry, I'm not going to hit all 1,500, but we are going to look at about 100 of them in about, I don't know, I think this slideshow has about 145 slides. So prepare yourselves. This is going to be a whirlwind, but just to give you an idea of the diversity of restaurants, and hopefully you get to learn something new, and hopefully, or you get to relive some good memories, at least here in your mind temporarily. So saying that, let's get this thing going. I am a historian, and the best way to work history is to start at the beginning. So let's start with the oldest photo of a restaurant we have in Sioux City. This is Balanger's Eating House, located on Pearl Street. This is an 1866 photograph. Wow. Wait until we get to some of the good stuff. We skip forward almost 30 years to the Elkhorn Restaurant, located at 1205 4th Street. This is between Iowa Street and Floyd Boulevard. This photo taken around 1892. Oh, this starts one of my interesting stories. Frank's Cafe, started by Leonard H. Frank, 1894 to 1921. This restaurant was later purchased by John Cahoon and Joe Gantz Sr., and they operated it from 1921 to 1928. Joe Gantz would take over sole proprietorship of this establishment, which was located at 514 5th Street from 1928 to 1940. Now keep all these names in mind. We've got Frank, we've got a Cahoon, and we've got a Gantz. All right? John Cahoon's brothers had other restaurants in Sioux City. Frank, Edward, and Vincent had the Cahoon Cafe and Hotel. This image showing their location at 411 Douglas Streets. Now these guys had a restaurant and hotel between 1923 and 1948. Vincent Cahoon had White Spot Lunch also at 507 Douglas Street from 1932, and it was around until 1969. But wait. Frank Cahoon started a new Frank's Cafe in 1938. It was located at 624 Pierce Street from 1953 to 1961. Of course, as we noted, the original Frank's became Joe Gantz's Cafe in 1928. The Cahoons also went on to buy the Townhouse Drive-In at 1703 Pierce Street and turned it into the Chuck Wagon Restaurant. There's another word up here that might be familiar to you, or a name, Townhouse. because the Cahoon family later started the townhouse at 2701 Floyd Boulevard in 1962. So there you have the Franks, the Cahoons, and oh wait, there's also more Gantz's with Joe Gantz Steakhouse at 1222 Pierce Street, operated by Joe Gantz Jr. from 1945 to 1978. There were lots of Johnson's restaurants, but this one certainly had the longest tenure, 1119 4th Street, and it was around from 1894 to 1924. People's Restaurant was located at 618 4th Street from 1901 to 1917. That's just across the street from us here at the museum. This restaurant would be followed up by a different firm, the Presto Café, at that same address. And they operated the Presto from, the Bovis brothers operated the Presto Café from 1917 until 1947. You can see it's pictured there right in the center. Frank Vondrak, in addition to having a saloon, also had a restaurant at 316 Douglas Street from 1899 to 1910. Just down the street was the Model Restaurant, advertising 15-cent meals at 308 Douglas Street. It was around from 1903 to 1908. Now 15 cents is a lot in 1905. This is an interior of the Model Restaurant. Of course, your department stores, their lunch counters, their restaurants are something of legend. This is one of the earliest images I could find. Davidson Brothers, which built a new department store in downtown in 1903, this restaurant, or this department store was equipped with a cafe. This early one happened to be the Mission Cafe, and this is around 1903. Of course, that tradition would continue long afterward. This is Davidson Brothers Cafe around 1947. Some restaurants, cafes, simply kind of hide in other images. This is a much more expansive image, but this is the August Anderson Cafe. You can see he's pictured there right in the center at 421 Jackson Street. But look how long he was around, 1906 to 1945. It's amazing. I showed you the research that Tom put together. So many restaurants, much like today, are only around for 1 or 2 years. This one, however, clearly 39 years. This is the, here on the right is Washington Dairy Lunch at 412 Pierce Street. It was around from 1908 to 1926. But wait, if we look to the left, you see that Leonard Frank's restaurant, or Frank Leonard's restaurant, there right next door at 416 Pierce Street. This is the Todd-Becker Tea Room in the basement of the Hotel Martin, 1913. Another one of those long-standing restaurants was Voss Cafeteria at 711 4th Street, around from 1918 until 1938. You might recognize this image. It's featured in our permanent gallery in the Stockyards area. The Iowa Lunch at 919 4th Street, 1918 to 1924. We'll have several digressions in this talk when I get to a particularly distinct Sioux City food or a distinct favorite of mine. Milwaukee Wiener House traces its origin. You might remember they just celebrated their 100th anniversary last year, 1918. Or is it 1915? So Mike and John, the present owners, trace the origin back to the Dionis brothers in 1918. But I think we could easily trace the origin of the Milwaukee Wiener House back to Gus Avichlos' Busy Bee restaurant, which started in 1915. Here is Gus Avichlos' Milwaukee Lunch at 404 4th Street, 1937. Of course, Milwaukee Wiener House didn't take on that name until 1950. And here are Mike and John at one of the older locations at the 309 Pearl Street location. So, we've begun the Sioux City hot dog wars. Coney Island at 510 Nebraska Street, 1918 to 2017. Here we see George Margis and Chris Papas. This restaurant was later operated by George's son, Steve, and his wife, Virginia, up until, well, until Steve's death, and Virginia decided to finally sell. Of course, the Coney Island legacy is not dead, because we still have the Coney Island in Marketplace, which has been there since 1973. This is Daisy Margis at the grill. And of course, we had, for a while, Coney Island in the Southern Hills Mall from 1980 to 1991. And then George's #1 hot dog shop, which initially opened as Milwaukee Wiener House #2 in 1975. This was at 419 Hamilton from 1975 until 2018, operated by George and Mary Demetrulis, who were relatives of Gus Demetrulis and Tom Eliades, who had Milwaukee Wiener House #1. The Mandarin Cafe, which you can see in a great sign there kind of on the left center. The Mandarin Cafe at 515 to 517 4th Street from 1919 to 1927. This was one of many chop suey restaurants in Sioux City. Of course, the first Chinese restaurant named Chop Suey, or the first Chinese restaurant in general, opened here in 1904. 1 Minute Lunch at 422 Pearl Street. Around for a whopping 2 years, 1921 to 1923. Philip Kostopoulos had a restaurant at 408 4th Street from 1923 to 1929. Those buildings were purchased and developed by the Davidson brothers, so he had to move to 424 Pierce Street and named his business Philip's Lunch. He was in that location from 1929 to 1947. Just 3 doors down, however, was another of Philip's restaurants, Philip's Cafeteria, 412 Pierce Street, from 1936 to 1956. Digression #2. The Ye Old Tavern, the sandwich, and other loose meats. So, J. David Heglin created a loose meat sandwich called the Tavern after the building he occupied, the Tavern Inn. His business was purchased in 1930 and became Tavern #1, or later on Ye Old Tavern Inn, which was operated by Abe and Bertha Kalid from 1930 to 1972. The reincarnation of the Ye Old Tavern at the Garden Cafe, which was Food Network magazine's best sandwich in Iowa for the year 2014. Back to Coney Island, Steve Margis serving his own tavern or loose meat sandwich. There is a distinction between a tavern and a sloppy Joe, okay? The Sioux City taverns have very little tomato basis. And Miles Inn, 401 South Fairmount Street, was a grocery store and provision store dating back into the 19-teens. It became home of the Charlie Boy, named after the son of John Miles, Charlie, and it's been around since about 1950. Of course, Tasty In-N-Out, the other Sioux City loose meat sandwich, at 2610 Gordon Drive, 1955 to the present, home of the Tasty. The John's Cafes. Where do we begin? Well, our story starts in 1924 with John's Lunchroom Cafe. Then, of course, there's John's Place from 1955 to 62, John's Coffee Cup Grill from 1961 to 1963, another John's Cafe from 1965 to 1970, and then Jolly John's, which became John's Cafe, 1968 to 2008. Thank you, Preston. Corn Palace Cafe, located here on the right, was located at 704 4th Street from 1925 to 1935. In this image also, if you look off on the far left, you can see the sign for the Voss Cafeteria, which we've already kind of passed up. Right over there. Ah, if you saw our Facebook publicity, you'll note that, well, this isn't the image, but it's a restaurant we used. Bishop Cafeteria, 1925 to 1928. Here we can see depicted on the right side of this image their original location in Sioux City at 516 Pierce Street. But if you read the sign in the center, you see that this building is about to be torn down to make way for a new $2 million Orpheum Theater. They were forced to move, and therefore moved to 412 Pierce Street from 1926 to 1930, and then eventually to their longtime home at 524 Nebraska Street from 1930 to 1984. And of course, the Bishops I remember, because I don't remember back to 1984, was the Bishops at the Southern Hills Mall from 1980 to 1998. An exterior showing a couple of Bishop signs. White Palace, not White Castle. White Palace, 1929 to 1969. You can see on the left, you have 1116 4th Street, which was the longest serving, 1929 to 1969. In the center, you have 400 5th Street, only around a year or two, 1929 to 1930. And then on the far right, you have 723 Pierce Street, which was a White Palace from 1931 to 1941. And is depicted here is an H&L Quick Lunch. It was that from 1953 to 1968. Of course, not pictured, because I don't have a picture, is 712 Pearl Street. Green Gables, a longtime Sioux City standard, 1800 Pierce Street, 1929 to 2014. Infamous for their hot fudge sundaes and matzo ball soup. Hey, who doesn't miss that? I found it interesting though, is that I was going through advertisements for some of these restaurants that during World War II era in 1944, 1945, Green Gables was advertising in the Sioux City Army Air Base's newsletter that they had Chinese food. So that was a new one on me. Of course, here's an interior of Green Gables. And somebody who has a keen observational sense, that is indeed Gene Sherman sitting in the back center. Harry's Number One, originally located at 1408 Morningside Avenue from 1930 to 1935, moved to downtown, a second location, in 1934, and was open until 1967 when this block was torn down during urban renewal. You can also see Voss Lunch here in this image. So you have Harry's right on the right and Voss in the center. On the right, again, we have the tiny little sign of Carl's Lunch Coffee Shop, 713 5th Street, 1931 to 1936. The Log Cabin Cafe / Waffle Shop, 819 West 4th Street, 1931 to 1955. And you better get your rabbit with us, or your fine steaks. This is a tale of a sign. The Seville Cafe at 410 4th Street, 1931 to 1935. Note the size and shape of the Seville Cafe sign. as we flip to the other side, and it becomes the Savoy Café. Same location, 1935 to 1955. This restaurant would be followed up by the Broiler Steakhouse, 1955 to 1967. But wait, the sign is still there. And of course, upstairs at the Broiler was the Penthouse Supper Club. This is a postcard interior of the Broiler. Griggs House of Hamburgers, 1405 Morningside Avenue. Very long time. That one was around 1933 to 1965. The Griggs also opened the Varsity Restaurant at 1439 Morningside Avenue, which was around from 1958 to 1988, and the Half Moon Inn at 714 South Lewis Boulevard, 1953 to 1974, and then again, 2013 to present. Bartles Café at 426 6th Street, 1933 to 1948. The Normandy at 38th and Summit, 1934 to 1999, followed up by Botticelli Ristorante Italiano, 1999 to 2006. There is your buffet at the Normandy from the 1960s. The Dixie Hamburger Shop, 431 Pierce Street, 1937 to 1954. Ted's Cafe at 5307 Military Road, 1937 to 1969. This, you might recognize the location because it became Harvey's, 5307 Military Road, 1980 to the present. Harkert's Wholesome Hamburgers at 523 Pierce Street, 1938 to 1944. That's on the first floor of the Orpheum Theater building. Sometimes we just have great photos of obscure restaurants like Clyde's Eat at 520 Douglas Street, 1939 to 1949. And we even get an interior of this one. Edith and Joe's started in 1941 as Edith's Place. 1942 to 1977, it was known as Edith and Joe's at the corner of Gordon Drive and Virginia Street, where there is presently an Arby's. The Cottage Inn, 1321 Pierce Street, 1946 to 1952. The Arcadia Restaurant at 14th and Pierce, 1946 to 1974. Tony's Fine Foods at 17th and Pierce, 1946 to 1953. Leo's Triangle at 14th and Highway 75, 1947 to 1961. Digression number 3. Baxter's Tavern and Cafe. Alan Baxter was the first person after a trip to Chicago to bring pizza to Sioux City. 215 South Fairmount from 1948 to 1966. Alan Baxter had a stroke in 1950. He was forced to give his sauce recipe to his cook. In 1957, the cook left and went with Fred Lennon and started Alfredo Pizza. Alfredo Pizza, 1957 to the present. You can see their location, 2322 Court Street from 1957 to 1992. And of course, the current Alfredo at 1900 Center Street, 1971 to present. And that is Fred Lennon's son, John, there on the right. Pizza place number 2, the Chesterfield Supper Club, 418 Nebraska Street, 1952 to 1964. Jerry's Pizza, originally Morningside Pizza, was started by Jerry and Eileen Foister in 1959. They just celebrated their 60th anniversary this year. The original Morningside Pizza, owned by Jerry, was at 1417 Morningside Avenue. They are still there. And Jerry's on Hamilton opened in 1980, and that's also when the name officially changed to Jerry's Pizza. Pizza Papa, 1967 to 1971, 2 locations at 1111 Nebraska and 3711 Gordon Drive. Shakey's Pizza, which was a chain at 2320 Transit Avenue, 1968 to 1980. The Pizza Oven, 411 24th Street, 1970 to 1982. Other pizza places would move into that place, including Mr. P's in the early 1980s, and a locally based Papa John's Pizza, not the chain, from 1985 to 1988. And Tony's Pizza, Tony and Gloria d'Ottavio, 1917 Pierce Street, 1971 to the present. Tony came to the U.S. in 1970 and to Sioux City, began working at another pizza place in town, B&B Pizza, at 419 West 3rd Street. I did not have a photo of that. I should mention, the restaurants I chose are largely contingent on what photos I have and can find. Westside Pizza, Bob and Karin Rowe at 1200 West 4th Street, 1977 to the present. Then Bob Rose Point after, the building itself also being known as 20th Street Pizza, 1982 to present. 901 South Cecilia up until 1990, and then their current location on Transit Avenue, 1990 to the present. And there is the exterior of Bob Rose. Thank you, Google Maps. Here are some pizza chains, and when they came to Sioux City: Pizza Hut in 1971, Godfather's in 76, Domino's in 1984, Little Caesars in 1987, and Sparrow at the Mall in 1990. The diner. I just called it Generic Diner at 723 West 7th Street, 1949 to present with question marks. Dick Myers was one of the original operators, 1954 to 77. Mike Arduini in the early 80s. And then Archie Arvin from 1990 to present. Now, I haven't been there in a couple of years, but I was told there might be a sign in the window that says closed. I don't know and cannot verify. These are some photos when it was Mike's Diner. And this is Mike Arudini, again, who had the diner from 1981 to 1983. Tom's Hut. Proprietor was Thomas Vaughn at 2626 Pierce Street, 1949 to 1952. Snow White Drive-In at 2535 Correctionville Road, 1949 to 1958. Toller's Starlite Grill in the Davidson building, around 1950 to 1970. I could not verify exactly when they started because the directory said they started in 1962. Well, I knew that wasn't right because I'd seen photos of the grill going back into around the late 1940s, so I decided to play it safe. The Topper Coffee Shop started initially at 4102 Morningside Avenue, moved to 2626 Pierce Street in 1955 and was there until 1965. This is, of course, the corner of 27th and Pierce Streets. The Waffle Shop downtown for quite some time, 503 5th Street or 403 5th Street from 1951 until 1980. Danny's Place, 2910 Military Road, 1951 until a suspicious fire in 1968. Red's Coffee Pot, 1130 5th Street, 1953 to 1979. The Copper Kettle, 1956 to 1999. You can see originally located at 309 6th Street and then later 525 Pearl Street. The Silver Steer Coffee Shop in the Livestock Exchange Building, 1956 to 1992. The Swedish Kitchen at the Jackson Hotel, at 5th and Jackson Street, 1957 to 1969. Highway 75 Cafe at 3200 North Highway 75, 1957 to 1985. The Minute Chef at 501 4th Street, 1958 to 1964. And you'll recognize that that's Efren Beta standing there in the intersection of 4th and Pierce Street. The Country Kitchen restaurant saga that I had to mull over so many times to figure out what was going on. 1911 Morningside Avenue, there was a Country Kitchen from 58 to 64. That moved around the corner to 2016 South St. Aubin from 1964 to 1974. 1974 is the appearance of Country Kitchen. Notice the spelling, it's different. And that is a chain, but it started in 1974. This at 620 South Lewis Boulevard, 1974 to 1986. This is currently the home of Big Deal Auto. It is, I believe, fluorescent pink today. Here's an interior of that Country Kitchen in 1974. The Paddock Steakhouse, 615 Highway 20 in South Sioux City, 1960 to 1992. McDonald's, the first McDonald's in Sioux City, located at 3093 Hamilton Boulevard from 1960 to the present. Now, some other fast food chains and their arrival in Sioux City. Kentucky Fried Chicken, 1964. Burger King, 1976. Hardee's, 1977. Wendy's, 1979. Long John Silver's, 1980. Chick-fil-A, 1981. Arby's, 1987. Subway, 1989. And Taco Bell, 1992. Couple other chains I didn't mention. I just loved the buildings of Taco John's in the early years. So Taco John's came to Sioux City in 1973. Their first location was at 3601 Gordon Drive, but I got such a kick out of the Taco John's at 18th and Hamilton, which you can see pictured here on the right. It's in a slide, and this is a photograph off a slide, and you're just looking at a very, very small part of it. So that's why the resolution isn't outstanding. Dairy Queen. Wayne Johnson brought Dairy Queen to Sioux City in 1948, and obviously they're still here today. Their first location was at 1121 Morningside Avenue, and shortly thereafter, 2430 Riverside Boulevard. The one you see pictured here is the Dairy Queen at 11th and Nebraska Street, which opened in the early 1950s. The Flamingo Steakhouse in South Sioux City, 1961 to 1969. Burger Quick at the corner of 12th and Pierce Streets, 1961 to 1976. A very popular place with teenagers. Obviously, it's about halfway between the two big high schools, well, halfway between two high schools in Sioux City, halfway between Central and Heelan. The Billy Boy drive-thru. Now, we'll recognize the one on Riverside Boulevard because it's still around today. Unfortunately, I didn't have a picture of that one, so what you're seeing is the Billy Boy drive-thru that was very shortly on Morningside Avenue, 1809 Morningside Avenue from 1964 to 1968. Little Pigs, or Little Pig House, 1419 Hamilton Boulevard, in the same location as George's Hot Dog Shop #1, 1963 to 1974. And I know, so it's really kind of, it's funny. Some of these are in here merely because we get calls from researchers or people come in and they're asking about these little places that were around, like when they were in high school. Yeah, I know there was a restaurant there in the 1960s. I'm trying to remember what it was. And this just happened to be, I think my coworker Haley did this research like a week ago. A 4th Street Cafe at 512 4th Street, 1964 to 1982. The Big Wheel Restaurant, 2920 Gordon Drive, 1964 to 1974. There was another location in the Sunset Plaza Mall, 1967 to 1970. The Biltmore Dining Room, 5900 Gordon Drive, 1964 to 1995. I had heard somebody refer to that as the noisy one. This is the buffet at the Biltmore, and then dining room. Barrett's Telefood, followed by Queen's Telefood, and then just plain Telefood. None of them were very successful, clearly located at 412 Pierce Street. All three of them together didn't last more than 6 years. Anime's Town Club at 511 7th Street, 1967 to 1977. The Red Onion Drive-In, located at 1625 Hamilton Boulevard, 1967 to 1982. Complete with sign for the car wash, and hey, there in the background is Pizza Hut. That's a 2-for-1, isn't it? The Castle Inn at 1122 Pierce Street, 1968 to 1973. Bonanza Steakhouse, or Bonanza Sirloin Pit, the initial location here in Sioux City at 4001 Gordon Drive, 1969 to 1984. And then the West 7th Street location, West 7th and Hamilton, opened in 1975 and turned into USA Steak Buffet in 1996. Scotty's. I don't have a photograph of the one that everybody remembers at 99 West 7th Street, which was around from 1970 to 1995. But I do have a photograph of the other location at 2401 5th Street, 1974 to 1980. Did you say Johnny Mars? You did! And that became Johnny Mars in 1980, 1980 to present. Runza. We might remember them from the mall, but they also had a location in Riverside from 1970 to 1974. And then, of course, in the Southern Hills Mall from 1987 to 1995. I did this special, even though Runza is a chain, I featured them simply because Runza's home base is not that far from us in Wayne, Nebraska. Interstate Cafe, 1013 4th Street, 1972 to 1977. I mentioned early on department stores with lunch counters. This is Grant's, WT Grant's in Transit Plaza, 1974 at their opening. This is the lunch counter there. The Peking Restaurant, 608 Pierce Street in the Davidson building, was around from 1974 to 2001. This is a nice opportunity to get a picture of an actual kitchen, too. And this became San Vong's Peking in 1990. The Brass Lantern at 1126th Street, 1974 to 1978. The Loaf and Brew, 512 5th Street, 1975 to 1981. The Tail and Ale, 1122 Pierce Street, 1975 to 1983. This one you get a 2 for 2. You see the sign, you've got Burger Quick in the background. Theo's on Highway 20, 1976 to 2009. Of course, interior of Theo's. Little King Deli, 800 Pierce Street, 1978 to 1991. Sneaky's, and their original name, Sneaky's, A Place to Eat, 3711 Gordon Drive, from 1979 to the present. There you can see Dave here celebrating their 40th anniversary. They also had a location at 1625 Hamilton Boulevard from 1985 to 1990. Cruz's restaurant, which you can see there on the right, 1981 to 1997, had formerly been Sambo's, 1975 to 1983. That is not the right address. I will have to address that. 1983 to 1991 was their location on Hamilton Boulevard, and of course there's a location on Stone Avenue for Cruz's. I've got to fix that slide. That's a catastrophe. Stavros Restaurant and Lounge in downtown at 512 4th Street, 1984 to 1990. Little Chicago Deli, 1988 to 2017 at 2121 Hamilton Boulevard. Later, 500 4th Street, and then until just recently at 525 4th Street from 2005 to 2017. The Uptown Grill, not the Uptown Cafe, which was up near 27th and Pierce. This is the cafe that was up in the Skywalks at Town Square. And this photo is 1989. And then a couple right up to the date. So this is how it gets to be some of Tom's favorite restaurants today. Dachau at 800 West 7th Street, 1993 to the present. Gregory's Rib Shack at 1010 West 7th Street, 1994 to 2004. La Juanita at 1316 Pierce Street, 1996 to the present. Esquire Magazine's 5th most life-changing burrito in 2013. Diamond Thai Cuisine at 515 West 7th, 2006 to the present. Oh, the Gyros in Sioux City. Oh, we are so lucky. We have Opa Time at 2129 Hamilton Boulevard, has been here since 2010, and Greek to Me out on Sunnybrook, 2011 to present. I swear I'm not advertising these people. These are just some of my favorite Sioux City foods. Soho Kitchen and Bar, 1024 4th Street, 2011 to present. And there's owner Julie Shaner. Tacos El Guerro at 525 Pearl Street. Eduardo, pictured here, had worked for La Juanita for 17 years before starting his own restaurant in 2013. And that is about 110 photos